The first 28 minutes of Saving Private Ryan are devoted to the bloody Allied invasion of Omaha Beach on June 6, 1944. The scene is rightly regarded as one of the best battle scenes in film history thanks to a brutal and unflinching recreation by Steven Spielberg. By placing this extended scene right at the start of the film, it's clear that Spielberg's goal was to drop the viewer right into the action without warning, a traumatic experience that leaves the viewer on edge for the rest of the movie. In this way, Spielberg mimics the exhaustion that the Allied soldiers had to fight through for the entirety of their time at war. But to create and realize this scene, Spielberg had to reconcile a fundamental contradiction. The sequence had to be chaotic and coherent at the same time. In other words, the critical impression of the battle should be one of randomness, of violence and death occurring so rapidly and indiscriminately that the mind is bewildered. It has no time to process. But that randomness has to be communicated cinematically via some sort of structure, a coherence that somehow leaves you with the feeling of chaos. What Spielberg is trying to do is fill in two different kinds of gaps in our knowledge about this historical moment. First, he wants to close the gap between Hollywood's heroic depictions of World War II and the vicious, deeply harrowing experiences of those who were actually there. I mean, even in strong depictions of the Normandy landings, like the great 1962 movie The Longest Stay, filmed entirely on tripods, the viewer's experience is still some distance from the subjectivity of the moment. In Saving Private Ryan, Spielberg wants to shrink that distance as much as possible. The other gap Spielberg wants to close is the one between what we know about this event and what we've actually seen of it. There is extremely little footage of the Normandy invasion on June 6, 1944, and almost none from the landing at Omaha Beach. There are a lot of reasons for this. A significant percentage of the cameramen who filmed the war for the Allied powers were killed. The remaining did their best to avoid that same fate by finding places of cover where they could film at a distance. For this reason, you get a lot of footage from before the landing at Normandy on the boats, which Spielberg recreates in Saving Private Ryan, and a lot of footage after the battle is over. During the chaos, cameramen were doing their best to keep themselves and their cameras out of danger. Documentaries that Spielberg relied more on were shot far from the Normandy beaches, specifically with the Marines at Tarawa, which was shot in Japan, and the battle for San Pietro, which was made by the famous filmmaker John Huston in Italy. Watching that second film, Spielberg was struck by how cameramen always stayed low to the ground and how the camera shook when an explosion went off nearby. As critic Toby Haygood notes, Spielberg discovered that if he adopted the style of the battlefield cameraman, he could achieve a more subjective experience of the war, and that's exactly what he did. But the footage that I think has the most impact on the Omaha Beach scene is John Ford's masterful war film, The Battle of Midway from 1942. In that film, Ford brilliantly keeps in moments when blasts affect the camera gate or knock his handheld cameras back and forth. From this and some creative editing, you get a much more visceral impression of the battle. So the essence of the idea for Saving Private Ryan is here, and it's obvious in the battlefield camera approach. But what's not so obvious is how Spielberg takes this essence and injects it with steroids. For example, one of the things that Spielberg does that no actual wartime cameraman could do is switch perspectives. The Omaha Beach scene functions from three different perspectives: the vantage of the invisible battlefield cameraman, the vantage of Tom Hanks, and the vantage of the German soldiers on the top of the cliffs. Spielberg alternates between these to give a more 360-degree perspective on the battle without losing any of the immediacy that is his primary concern. Even crazier, it actually took me a few watches to realize that this shot right here is actually meant to be a moment inside Tom Hanks' head, like the most intense first-person shooter game ever. This kind of thing, couched almost hidden in the middle of the rest of the footage, intensifies that feeling of being there to its most extreme. Maybe this is why the sequence triggered actual PTSD in a few World War II veterans who watched the film. But the key to understanding how Spielberg squares chaos with coherence is in the amount of information that he crams into each shot. The Omaha Beach scene might seem like the craziest, fastest, most intense sequence in all of film, but I counted the shots. In the scene that lasts exactly 24 minutes, there are exactly 200 shots, which means that every shot averages 7.2 seconds. I mean, that is an incredibly high average for a scene like this. And it didn't seem right to me until I actually went back and watched the scene with this in mind. You're asked to comprehend so much in this Omaha beach scene, so Spielberg eases the pressure on your brain by panning, tilting, or moving the camera when others would just cut. This way you don't have to waste too much mental energy on orienting yourself. You can absorb the relevant information as it comes. And Spielberg is great at feeding you relevant information. As my friend Tony once remarked, this is a guy who loves to move the camera with motivation. So in a 12-second shot like this one, you get a wide shot, 2 close-ups, 3 inserts, and a medium shot. 8 pieces of information. And the transitions here are really great too. He loves to start a long shot with the action from the previous moment. This is how he strings together all these mini vignettes and gives them a forward momentum that keeps the viewer on track. Of course, there's so much more to say about this scene, about the sound mixing and the lenses and the desaturation of the film stock, about the costume design and the set design, but that's all been well covered before. What inspires me about this scene is how such a maelstrom of action retains its focus from end to end. You can't just stage some insanity, film a bunch of it from different angles, and hope to find a through line in the editing. A scene with an impact like this, something that you can revisit again and again and find new things, takes real cinematic concentration. In other words, anyone can capture chaos, but only the best can capture chaos with clarity. There is a new Nerdwriter video every Wednesday, so if you go right there to that box that I've set up and click that, you'll subscribe and get all the videos, and that is what helps me out the most. It really is. A couple other things. I'm way too backlit right now, by the way. I just launched the nerdwriter.net, which is my website. You can find the videos there and ask me questions, and frequently asked questions is there. So check that out. Also, I'm back on Instagram. I don't really know why, at the Nerdwriter. Follow me there. Some cool stuff. I'll try not to post garbage pictures. I might post some pictures of garbage, but only if it's like artistic and worthwhile. Anyway, I'll see you guys next Wednesday.